this technology. Well, we're live already. Great. Can you hear us? There will be like 20 seconds delay, Scott, from what we say to the chat. So I think we perhaps can wait a bit more, like no, 7 people already, just a bit more, and then we start. Okay. Well, Professor, I'm going to pass on to you some questions we had during the presentation. It's very great opportunity. It's an honor for us to have you here online, live. And well, first of all, some people were asking the title of the play that was mentioned in the presentation. Do you happen to have it?
Sure. First of all, I want to say bon dia and obrigado for inviting me. The play is called Sleep No More. It's actually sort of done as a combination of dance and mime. It's based on Macbeth, Shakespeare's Macbeth, but it also has some elements from the Alfred Hitchcock film Rebecca in it. It's an interesting combination of those two stories. But it's been in New York now for, I'd say, 7 or 8 years, maybe longer. And part of its success is that people go many times. Instead of just going once, people keep going back because, as I said in the talk, people want to clear the game. So.
There's another question we had during the presentation. That is, please, can you share some reflections on the imaginary friends and all sorts of game that happen to have these strange creatures that nobody sees?
Yeah, I just saw that question. So it's not something I've thought a lot about before, but clearly, and one of the people posting made some good points about imagining friends as your first effort at sort of having relationships beside your parents. I'm sure that makes sense, but it's also just worth saying that it is an opportunity. To me, it is more of identity exploration of sort of your imaginary friend is on some level a reflection of who you think you are or who you want to be as well. And so it is a way of sort of imaginary friends are another way of creating story. A lot of kids don't make imaginary friends, but they take a doll or a puppet and they imbue it with a personality. And I don't know whether the great American comic strip Calvin and Hobbes was ever translated into Portuguese or Spanish, but that was a whole brilliant comic strip about the ways in which a child really is working out all of his personal issues with the so I think it's quite powerful, but I think it is very much in the space of identity play.
Great. There is someone who asked, Dr. Scott, could you talk a little bit about the design process for designing a game?
Sure. And it's going to vary in some ways based on what the game is about. Let me, I think on some level, when we're designing a game, we're always sort of thinking about existing games. Remember I talked about the ways in which even as an artist, you're a spectator. So in some ways, any game we design is sort of a reaction to an existing game, whether it's, I liked this particular idea, but I want to change. What if I changed these issues, these rules, or these objectives somewhat? So that's sometimes what's going on when we're doing games that are, and a lot of our work is around I want to make it clear that I don't think that there is a strict boundary between what people call educational games and entertainment games. That's not a model I agree with. I think any good game has got to be profoundly entertaining, and any good game, including Grand Theft Auto or FIFA World Soccer, is educational. So, but if you're designing a game that sort of has some sort of content area, whether it's science or soccer, I think it's important to engage with people who are experts in that field and to understand what they do and what's playful in it for them. Sometimes I'll stick to the stuff I know best, which is working with scientists or mathematicians on games. If you go to a scientist and say, where is the game in your work? They may not know how to answer that question. But if you ask them something like, well, what do you think about when you're in the shower or when you're out for a run? When do you get inspired? That's when you usually get them to talk about the ways in which the game is, the study rather, for them is actually quite, is engaging, is creative. You try to find out sort of where the creativity in their work is and what the challenges in their work is. And you try to make a game that's actually about the real challenges. So a good game about science isn't a game that quizzes a kid on chemistry facts or geology facts. It's a good game about science is a game that gets the players solving the same problems that the scientists are trying to solve. And the first step in that would be finding out sort of where the challenge is for the scientist. But that's not just about games around academic subjects. I think in any game, the point is to find what's the interesting challenge, what's the hard part? How do I make it hard and interesting at the same time? It's pretty easy to make a game that's too hard to play. Mm-hmm. Hard, it's not difficult to make a hard game. It's difficult to make a game that is hard and interesting and that invites people to actually solve the problem. And I think the real hard work of game design is figuring out how to give players a way into the difficult challenge. You come up with a difficult challenge, but then you have to figure out how do I make it possible for them to get into it, to slowly get into it, to slowly overcome it. And of course, the other side is you don't want to make it too easy. So okay. I know it's, yeah.
There is another question here, Professor. Do you consider watching TV a sort of game?
I think primarily, of course, I would argue that it's being a spectator. But yes, I think we all make, the cool thing about games is we all make games out of things, but no two people do it the same way. But so for some of us, one of the things that's very interesting to me is the rise of Twitter and other forms of co-viewing. So when people are watching a show, co-watching a show via Twitter and making comments to each other as the show is going on, I think there is sort of a game there. The game might be sort of, can we anticipate, or who can make the funniest comment about the show? Some of it is just the social pleasure of, some of it's not a game. Sometimes it's just the social pleasure of watching with other people. And you and I might be watching a show together and tweeting, and to you it might just be the pleasure of watching it with me. And to me, the game might be how funny can I be? So I wouldn't say that watching a show is automatically a game, but I think many of us make a game out of watching a show.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, great. There is another question here. We have Paula Picasoy. She's asking if you could talk a bit about the gamification of work and study time that has been happening all around here in Brazil these days.
Yeah.
If you could say some words about it.
Yeah, and there's not one answer to that question because different people mean different things when they say gamification. The good version of it is simply doing what I've sort of already talked about, which is to saying, let's find out where the game is in this activity and let's help bring that game out. Let's bring it forward. Let's truly find the game in chemistry and let's help kids play that game. I don't think that's what usually happens when people say gamification. Usually what people say when they say gamification, unfortunately, is this idea that if I create the structures that we associate with games, if I apply them to unpleasant activities, I can trick you into doing those unpleasant activities. So if I give you points for doing something you don't want to do, if I give you achievements, you'll be tricked into thinking it's a game. And that just doesn't work. We know from studies of incentives that if we give what we call extrinsic rewards, that is rewards outside of that. So if I pay you to do your homework, you'll take the money for a while and you'll do the homework. But over time, you'll hate the homework even more. And eventually you won't even care about the money. You'll just stop doing it. And much of gamification is this idea of extrinsic rewards, of putting a layer of game over an unpleasant activity. And the reason that is that unfortunately, much of school and much of work, I'm going to be a little radical here, I think are unnecessary, and they're not things that people want to do. And they're not, and I would even argue that they're not things that people actually need to do, that we could come up with different ways of organizing school and organizing the work that we all need to do to survive in ways in which are not so isolated from our lives, the joy of life. I think if we imagine through most of human history, the boundary between play and work was quite fluid. If you were, here I imagine a hunter-gatherer. I'm going to go off a little bit here on this story, but imagine a hunter-gatherer anywhere walking through the woods looking for prey or something. At any time, they might be singing, they might be telling each other stories, they might even be sort of making a dance out of their movement or something like that. That kind of fluid movement between play and work is, I think, the way we evolved. Similarly, my talk about children, for most of human history, children learned while they were playing with each other. They learned to be adults. And so the boundaries, they weren't, we didn't isolate work as something you only did 8 hours a day for somebody who paid you. Rather, work was something you did sort of regularly in the course of your life while you were playing. Now, I know that's somewhat utopian, but I think we should really be looking for ways in which the boundaries of work and play are more fluid. And we should really understand that the kinds of work that matter most and the kinds of learning that matter most are the kinds that we can do playfully.
Very interesting answer. We tend to see those universes of work and play as opposite and far away things, and very nice to see your comprehension on this theme. In fact,
I would go so far as to say, I will answer that next question, but I just want to say that work and play are not only not opposites, but when you're at play, you're actually hard at work. You're doing hard stuff. And so we need to come up with a new formulation. I agree. For a long time, I talked about work and play as distinct, but we have to come up with a new formulation.
Yeah, sure.
And yes.
We have Aldana Dualdi from Argentina. She's asking if we could give some reflections on the massive success Minecraft. What are their secrets?
Yeah. I think Minecraft is that space where that I talk about, where ideally these forms of play really merge. Obviously, Minecraft has game-like components like surviving the night and that kind of stuff. But by and large, I think the game of Minecraft is discovering new materials and figuring out how to fashion things. It really makes a game out of the kind of creative work of childhood. I think in some ways, and I hope that now that it's owned by a large corporation, it doesn't change too much. I think Minecraft is one of the most exciting spaces in the digital world, just because of all the power and freedom that it gives children to play. And all the different, and what I love about Minecraft is that you can find all forms of play going on inside Minecraft, from storytelling to creation to competitive play, a huge amount of collaboration. It's highly social. It's it probably is not. What it probably isn't is the most challenging game. I think the game-like elements of Minecraft are not as challenging, but it's a wonderful space for creation, for messing around. So it's definitely at the creator end of the pole, but it's a wonderful space for that. So great.
There's some question here about games and addiction with children. Do you think? What's your opinion on that?
I think I don't want to minimize it. The cases where it's a problem, and I'll speak to those in a moment. I'm not saying it's never a problem, but I want to point out that we confuse terms. Addiction is a complicated term, and real addiction, like addiction to alcohol or drugs or gambling, have very specific properties, which most things that we call addiction to games don't usually have. So I think it's actually quite constructive when and forgive me if my dog is barking downstairs. I hope that's not a problem. It's if a child, if any of us, if we suddenly get really deeply invested in something and we spend a lot of time on it, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we've all had the experience of so being involved in a book that we stop everything for a weekend and read the book, or becoming obsessed with overcoming a certain challenge, whether it's a game or solving a fixing something mechanical. Those kinds of that kind of obsessive behavior is actually quite satisfying and rewarding. Usually, it usually has an end point. It usually stops when we sort of solve the problem. And so a kid is just temporarily hooked on a game and they play it really hard and then they beat it. I think that's a very positive experience, even if for a while they were sort of excluding everything else. And there are always going to be some people who fall victim to obsession. And in fact, the studies have shown that there's small numbers of kids who become obsessive about gameplay to the exclusion of all sorts of social relationships, and that's a problem. That if they didn't have digital games, they would have done something else. When I was a kid, parents worried. There were, in the days before digital games and even before VCRs, parents would worry about a kid who read too much. There would be kids who would only read, who would never go outdoors and play, would never be friendly with. I'd say by and large, usually those weren't real problems, but occasionally, parents need to know when a child's exhibiting truly obsessive behavior. But that isn't happening because the game is addictive. That's happening because something else is making the child obsessive, and the game is just the thing they've chosen to obsess about. I will make one modification. There were certain online games, I think, that sometimes particularly where they can keep changing the game online, like gambling, they can be engineered to be addictive. I think gambling is like casinos sort of know how to keep it addictive. I think there's some games that do that. And as parents, we need to be watchful. But I think the average game is not doing that. The average game is not trying to be addictive. It's really a good thing that it's engaged your child so seriously. I guess food is bad for us if we eat too much, but we never talk about abstinence from food. We all have to learn how to moderate our eating and our drinking, and the same thing is true with our play.
And we'll have the presence of game specialist this afternoon. She's talking also about this thing, and she has a very similar point of view to yours, in my opinion. We have another question that's about interactive games that go through streaming. Like Black Mirror, Bandersnatch, and what are the future possibilities that this kind of entertainment has?
I think it's I think we're at very early. Well, I want to distinguish. Obviously, mass gameplay has been going on for quite a while now, and so, and I think this is not what the question is about, but clearly, games for a long time, World of Warcraft proved that, and Minecraft proves that people love playing together socially online. So that's obviously a powerful thing. And again, I realize I'm not yet getting to the question here, but I also want to point out esports is also a huge thing, which is the sense that we get when we know we're watching something with lots of other people, and there's sort of a community through Twitch of everybody sort of commenting on the games that they're watching. That the social aspect of that is immense. The same thing with people on Twitter following sports. I'm actually quite interested in a future in which there's more, even in real professional sports, where there's more live interaction among spectators while watching, whether it's football or, my own particular love is bicycle racing, and I'd love to be able to talk to other people watching a live event. Now, what I think you're talking about in this question, and so I think there's a huge future there. I think people who figure out how we can make interesting interfaces for us to watch an event and talk to each other and even play sort of together at the same time, I think that's going to be very big. But I think the question around Bandersnatch and around Black Mirror is more about sort of interactive sort of storytelling and sort of the story actually evolving live and online through streaming. I think that is, I like to believe that's going to be huge. I don't know, and I have to admit, I did not sort of watch Bandersnatch, and it's my failure that I haven't sort of kept up with sort of what the general reaction to that was. I knew about it, but I should have paid more attention. I think we're still in very early days in terms of figuring out how to actually do it. I think the question of how storytelling is going to actually happen in real time through sort of AI and digital mechanisms, not just through, individuals making up stories, is we're still at very early days. But I think it is going to be. It's easy to talk about something that might happen when you don't yet have clear proof of it. But if I had to guess, I think that there will be some huge future for sort of people collectively watching a story that's being created simultaneously by the thousands of people who are streaming it. I just don't think we've yet solved exactly how that's going to happen yet.
Mm-hmm.
So.
We have another question, Giovana Botti. Do you think this a typical moment we live today, the pandemics, could stimulate the social component in the game's experience?
I think what the moment, yes, but I think in effect, the moment has proven to us just how powerful the social component of games is. I mean, the fact that people are playing board games, that they're going online to play with each other. When we were, I actually think the early days of video games and the design of consoles initially led mostly to solo gameplay. It was you versus the computer. And even in those early days, even in as my children were growing up, I would come home and there would be 5 kids in the room with 1 kid playing the game and 4 kids watching and making comments. And so even when it was a solo game, the social component of gameplay was always huge. And now, obviously, games for a while now, thanks to have become multiplayer. But I think that the pandemic has just sort of proven us how much we actually value the social component. Now that we can't get in the same room and watch, we've realized that what really matters with us in games is not just playing against the machine, but sort of how much we want to share our experience with other players. So I think it's reminding us. It's really reminding us of how much the social matters. And I think it is going to lead to many more games designed around. I think it's going to accelerate the rate at which these kinds of the things we've been talking about, sort of the live streaming, the ability to sort of be on one screen but talking to people on many screens, is going to increase. So.
Great, great. Another question, do you think kids could find new and serious ideas for problem solving of the world, solving the problems of the world through collaborative gaming, ecology, equality, poverty, etc.?
Yeah. Part of me wants to just say yes, but I also want to be cautious. There have been attempts at doing this in the past, like Jane McGonigal did a game, World Without Oil, which was like sort of like Vanished, was what we call an alternate reality game, with the hope of actually sort of solving problems of energy and pollution. And I don't think it. Some people played. I don't think it really produced any huge successes, but I do think, and I think I also want to say we've seen some really negative things that a lot of the, I don't know whether you're seeing it in Brazil, but a lot of the organizing of right-wing kind of fascist and racist and sexist activity people have used game platforms as ways of finding people to do that. So I don't want to ignore the negative examples. But that said, I think generally speaking, games are about solving difficult problems and about being creative. So I do like to think that a well-designed games, and also stories are incredibly powerful. I think, unfortunately, and by the way, there are movements, there are people working very hard to try to organize the games industry certainly in the English-speaking world. I'm sure it's true in other cultures as well, but around anti-racism and anti-sexism, and so I think there definitely are efforts at play to make games that are and games and stories that promote positive pro-social values more. So I think in some ways, I think the biggest obstacle is that the games industry, like the movie industry, are largely currently organized in a certain way. And that's a certain way around a certain kind of mass entertainment. And for lack of a better word, it's highly capitalistic. And it's going to have the same values that the rest of capitalism have, which tends to be around maximizing the benefit of the capital owners, not the public at large. So I think we need to come up until the game industry. I think things will be better if the game industry or the film industry can allow more independent voices to flourish. Then there'll be more opportunities for stories and games that I think help advance these concerns. But I will say again, the creativity and the hard work that kids show playing games is certainly something that we could harness to solve the world's problems. And I think that the current generation of kids who've grown up playing games seem to me much more enlightened than my generation was. So I'm hopeful. I didn't want to sound too pessimistic. I am hopeful.
Yeah, let's stay positive.
Yes.
I think we're approaching already almost half an hour of conversation. Perhaps I'll make one last question. Do you think it's okay, Professor?
Yeah, sure. Happy to.
Yeah. If you could explore a bit more the activities that MIT Game Lab is currently doing with and how it relates with the development sector. Game development sector.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, we're doing a number of very different projects. I will say that although you might think that coming from MIT, our work would be around the newest technologies, but we actually don't. Our groups don't do that. We're not. It's not that we're not interested in new technologies, but we're not coming at it as engineers trying to develop them. We're much more interested, sort of, I would say, as creators and social scientists. And so our work, and educators. So our work is more around harnessing games as they now exist and what are the best uses of them. And we're working in quite a number of very different spaces. And so I don't want to get too boring. We're doing work. One of the things we're doing is work around colonialism in games, the ways in which a lot of traditional games in Europe actually reinforced colonial ideas of conquest and settlers, and the ways in which racism actually appears in lots of the traditional games, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. So we're doing work on that. We've been doing a lot of work over the years on esports, understanding sort of the culture of esports, both of the athletes who are doing it and the people who are playing it. We continue to study esports. The work that we did on Vanished, we're evolving. We're trying to come up with a model. Vanished was a really interesting experiment, but it was also something you could only sort of do once. It was very expensive to do it. We had about 8,000 kids playing by the time it was over. But so we're trying to come up with a model where we're calling it a alternate reality in a box, where a single group, like a teacher or a camp counselor, could sign up a bunch of kids and push a button and launch those kids into a story like a little bit like Vanished, that they would play just among themselves for 6 weeks, say. And the real challenge there is that games like that actually require some skill for the game runner, for the person who's actually running the game. And so can we come up with a version where someone who's new at this could run a game like that successfully? So we're doing that. We do a lot of projects around helping kids design their own games. So we come up with interesting programming languages that let kids create spaces. I mean, I think it's not exactly Minecraft, but it's similarly trying to come up with worlds, give kids the opportunity to invent their own world. So that's sort of the range of stuff we do. As I said, I think we're more interested in harnessing the technologies that are already being used and making sense of them than we are. There are other people at MIT working on new technologies, but that just happens not to be our group. So
great. Well, I think we have already passed the time we had planned to the conversation. We're very happy to have you here. It was a real great pleasure for us to have you here, Professor Scott. And we are going to have the other activities this afternoon with a chat, with games and children, with Professor Ivelisse Fortin, that's a psychologist, talking to a TV host called Mariana Cocho. Well, all in Portuguese. Unfortunately, we hadn't had the possibility to translate all of that to you. But hopefully in a future we can arrange your coming to Brazil to talk to us and bring more of your experience as a professional and a scholar on games and all this game industry, okay?
It would be my pleasure. As I mentioned, I've loved my several visits to Brazil, and I hope that in the future I'll be able to come back. So.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Pessoal,
bye-bye.
Sigam a gente no YouTube. Fiquem atentos. Vamos continuar o festival hoje. Tem muita atividade bacana. Até logo.